Space is vast and infinite. It's practically impossible for any one person to encompass it all, to fathom its reaches and majesty. And here's a man who's no exception, the Space Quest historian.
Hi, I'm the Space Quest historian, and this time I'm going native on your ass. Hvad så, drenge? Hvordan har I det? Det lyder godt. Det her giver ikke en skid mening. Det burde jeg holde op med. I'm sure that made a frightening amount of sense to you, and with that in mind, let's take a look at how Space Quest was perceived by people who weren't Americans. You may or may not know this, but Space Quest was released in countries that weren't America. For instance, Finland, Iceland, Italy, and yes, Denmark. These countries, however, weren't big enough to warrant the attention of the Sierra Foreign Department, the ones that translated and localized each game for individual releases overseas. That honor was reserved for countries of historical importance like Russia and Germany and, well, France, but who cares about France? You may not know this either, but the games didn't just get translated, they got picked apart. The guys didn't just go in there and replace text by just copying in some shit by people who didn't even speak English like me. They actually went in and got creative. They got in and changed graphics and changed texts and stuff, and when they weren't content with just messing around with the game's content, they went off and did their own fucking thing. I mean, what the fuck is this? Oh. Seriously, DOS nostalgic. What the fuck am I looking at?
Hey, what the hell am I doing on your show? I barely even know you.
I don't care. Look, I like vodka as much as the next guy, but you've got some explaining to do.
That's stereotyping. I don't even live in Russia anymore.
Oh yeah? What's in the sippy cup?
Lemonade?
Just tell me what the fuck we're looking at here.
Alright. Ivan Lashkin and the Price of Freedom is a 1997 Russian adventure game developed by a small team and published by a major publisher. That was more than a little bit inspired by the Space Quest series, but nobody ever denied the inspirations. In fact, it was kind of its selling point that it was Russian Space Quest, and it was indeed a humorous sci-fi adventure. That's a bit of a I'm being too kind to it, because it might have been a sci-fi adventure that looked like Space Quest in many ways, down to ripping off certain elements. But as far as humorous, the dialogue is painfully unfunny, and the puzzles are awful. So in a way, it was a failure, but nevertheless, that is a kind of product that you could see published in Russia in the 90s and advertised in magazines, and that sort of thing is completely normal.
When your countrymen weren't just dreaming shit up out of the blue, how did the real Space Quest series fare in Russia?
Well, the Space Quest series was rather popular in Russia. Although adventures only spread around Russia in the early 90s, mostly because the situation in my part of the world was very different from the rest of the civilized world. I mean, after the fall of communism, we had an open market, but no copyright law, so there was no distributors to distribute games in the Russian territory, so it was all acquired by piracy. All the games were acquired by piracy. And because of that, they were all imported in their native languages, and it normally isn't a problem with other games, especially in the in the 80s, the early PC games, where an average Russian person can read the Latin alphabet, but that's about it. But you can figure out where the stuff in the menus is, but and if that's all you need, that's good for you. With adventure games, of course, it's different, because once you hit on such a text-heavy game genre, there is an issue of language barrier.
So, the language barrier, huh? Well, how does an American game fare in the land of cold winters?
You're in Scandinavia. Let's drop the Russian thing already. But certain enthusiasts and hackers took it upon themselves to translate the games that they liked to be accessible to general Russian public. And originally there was this gentleman by the name of Igor Malishko who translated early Sierra games based on the AGI engine. So he did the first two Space Quest games. Those translations are decent. I mean, the humor is preserved in most cases, and the intricacy here was actually translated in the parser because Russian is very different from English. So this gentleman wrote a special loader that allowed AGI games to accept Cyrillic input. And that's where the translations are a bit fiddly. English is a pretty straightforward language, so you can eventually figure out the words, even if everybody stumbled onto that problem with the parser games where you had to figure out what words to use. And in Russian it sometimes became even more complicated because the terms that were used for certain objects and stuff you couldn't really figure out. But overall, those games are well translated and done, fine. They were very playable. And later on, around 1992, there was a hacker group called Taralij and Jabbercrack Software. Just a bunch of hackers and translators united to translate a whole bunch of Sierra games. They were specializing in specifically Sierra games, and they translated Space Quest 4 and 5, and those translations were very good. They were amazing, without any tools and or any references. This group of hackers managed to change the graphics, sometimes change just certain things, the scripts, and what they did is they took the spirit of those games, and certain jokes of course are untranslatable, or puns or something like that, and they took all of that was foreign to a Russian person and turned into a very sort of Russian material. Basically every untranslatable English joke turned into an untranslatable Russian joke, and it felt very organically and very organic, and in a way, and they distributed those translations for free. So it was a true labor of love. It wasn't a company. It wasn't Sierra selling the rights to a distributor to distribute it in some other civilized country, and then people who actually contracted to work for the company worked on these games to translate them. This was the case where people loved the game so much they were willing to spend time making tools and putting a lot of effort into the translations and putting out there, and they knew the quality was so high that people would want to play those translated games. They're just they're incredible, and in all my time I lived in Russia, I have never encountered any other translations later on made by official companies when copyright law and companies got established and there were actual publishers and translators. I've never actually ran across translations that were made with such love and passion. Later on, we had a company called CDS Limited that took a bunch of VGA Space Quest games and translated one and they did Space Quest 1 VGA, 4 and 5. Those translations were good, also graphical alterations and everything, but they were really word by word, and even though they're good and everything is communicated correctly in those translations, they were lacking the soul that T and J translations had. The humor wasn't as funny. Like T and J managed to put a spin on just about everything. Like it instantly applied to a Russian person in everything that they did. And CDS, not so much. They're good translations, but they of course, Space Quest 1 VGA exists only in version from them, so that's the version most people played. But as far as 4 and 5 goes, they were overshadowed by T and J's. The Space Quest 4 CDS translation actually used CD-ROM version for its basis, and thus inherited all those CD version problems, but also didn't actually come with any voiceovers. All those are cut out. It just translated the text, so the intro was gone and stuff like that. So those translations were made a couple of years later and didn't stack up to the wonderful translations that T&J has. And also later on, Space Quest 6 was translated by one of the major pirate publishers at the time, and took advantage of the laws, the copyright laws not being there and making a lot of money. But that version is pretty bad. Only the text is translated, the speech is left intact, but the quality is just not there. It's not good, and it diminished. That version is also not very common, not as well known as, let's say, Space Quest 4 and 5, probably the most well known Russian versions of Space Quest. And because these translating groups actually mostly targeted Sierra games in the early 90s, those were the adventure games accessible to the Russian gamers. So basically, in the early 90s, with the exception of, I think, Kirandia games, Legend of Kirandia games, Sierra games were pretty much the only ones translated. It makes sense that clones like Ivan Loshkin would pop up, because they were directly inspired by the really only adventure games available to your average PC gamer. Russia in the early 90s basically grew up on the Sierra adventure games.
Thanks for your insights, Dossie.
Please don't call me that.
Now, Russia weren't the only country to get into adventure games in a big way. Hey Chris, how you doing?
Hi trolls, what's up?
Hope I'm not interrupting.
Oh no, I was just sitting here minding at my own business, and all of a sudden the screen went blank and you were in my face. To be honest, I think I was having a heart attack.
Splendid! So, Chris, we were talking about how Space Quest fared in other countries. What was the situation in Germany when Space Quest hit the scene?
Well, adventure games always were and still are very popular in Germany. And Space Quest was one of the most well-received games back then. There weren't huge differences how well the early Sierra games were received by magazines, but regardless who you're talking to about the early Sierra adventures, the names Roger Wilco and Leisure Suit Larry are the first you'll get, instantly followed by favorite scenes and quotes people love the most. The cool thing is, these games were made 20 years ago, and people still go around and talk about them. And this is as good as it gets, if you ask me.
That's interesting, because where I live, if you're lucky enough to meet someone who actually knows what an adventure game is, it's usually Monkey Island this, or Day of the Tentacle that.
Well, back in the early days when 3D shooters technically were impossible, I'd even go the distance and say that adventures were one of the most popular genres for PCs around here. And speaking of Sierra games, Larry's mostly the first name to drop here, without the leisure suit, just Larry, followed by a dirty laugh. And Wilco is a close second, but they're both fondly remembered and all-time favorites. The Secret of Monkey Island was and always will be the German adventure game reference until Space Winter hits, that is. There, I said it! Can I have my $20 now?
Score!
Ah, yes, and forgive me for being presumptuous, but you live in one of those weird countries that don't believe in subtitles, right?
Ja. Nervt halt, wenn der halbe Bildschirm voll mit Buchstaben ist und du den halben Film damit beschäftigt bist, ein Buch zu lesen. Anyway, yeah. Space Quest did get full translations, starting with Space Quest 3. And being a 10-year-old German gamer who just learned the words push button, which by the way you can do a lot with in Space Quest 2, I was first introduced to the Space Quest series in the German language. And let me tell you, it was so very true to the spirit. My brother and I are still throwing quotes at each other's head from back then nowadays. And you can tell that the guy who did this wanted to get this right. The one mistake he made was translating the name of Festerblatz into Meister Fistel. God knows where that came from. There's an unwritten rule. You don't translate names. Ever. Trust me, you don't want to know what the translation of Gigerich means. There was nothing wrong with Space Quest 4 too, still was the real deal. But with Space Quest 5, well, things got a little weird. They started translating Beatrice Wankmeister's name into Schlampmeister. I think they did that because in Germany you're wanking when you're drunk and you're trying to get home. I'm not sure that came out right. Anyway, the translation is sort of destroying the joke here. And they renamed some of the planets. They changed Clorox 2 into Omo 2, which I think is just the name of the German cleaning powder instead. They translated Jules' name into Zaba, which would be the basic translation for it. And Roger's laugh also changed from a heartful, dirty laugh into a way I think no person has ever laughed before.
Time and space bend under the fibrillations of the time-rip transfluxers. Your adrenaline and stomach reel with the hyperbolic hyperbole. And finally...
After the talkie version of Space Quest 4, which was thankfully left untouched and introduced me to the one and only Gary Owens, Space Quest 6 approached in 1995.
Roger Wilco, treten Sie bitte vor.
And also got a full makeover, a full dubbed German version, dub voices, dub text, on-screen text, on-screen graphics.
Keine Zeit für Nostalgie. Ich muss mich zuerst ein schwieriges Extraktionsproblem kümmern.
While Roger got away with a fitting voice, the main attraction, the narrator, didn't fit at all.
Offensichtlich ist, wieder einmal, das Laster etwas profitabler als alle anderen Gewerbe. Dieser Ort ist fast zu hip für den Planeten. Aber das dürfte nicht allzu schwer sein bei diesem Planeten. Offensichtlich gab es während des Vorganges einige unbedeutende Problemchen. Niemand hat etwas bemerkt.
But it could have been worse. Could have been something like this.
Du hast mich überzeugt. Ich muss meinem Zorn Luft machen. Zorn soll meine Macht verhundertfachen. Jetzt reicht's. Wir sind doch hier nicht auf dem Rummelplatz.
During the series, a whole lot of names are changing. I already told you the thing with Roger's wife, but Festerblatz 2 is changing back again from Meister Fistel to his English name in Space Quest 6.
Tagchen, Fremder. Mein Name ist Blatz. Festerblatz.
In Space Quest 3, they found a cool German name for Bacchusoids. They called them Zasteroide, but they switched that back in Space Quest 4. The subtitle of Space Quest 1 also got variations in translation. While they named it Begegnung auf Serien in Space Quest 4, which is basically wrong and implying that Serien is a planet, the German subtitle of Space Quest 1 changes at the cinema sign of Space Quest 6 into Begegnung mit den Seriens.
Oh, klasse. Wirklich wunderbar. Verdammt gute Arbeit, du metallener Mülleimer.
I don't know how much time the translators had for the games, but this is one of the main responsibilities if you're about to translate a sequel. You have to check the previous parts.
So, guys, let's change the tables on the Americans for a change. What were some of your favorite jokes in the translated versions of Space Quests that American audiences just wouldn't get?
I don't really have favorite jokes or anything like that. I just enjoy the whole thing because it's such a unique thing, because it was done by people out of love, and they put so much dedication to those translations. There is nothing else like that, and even to this day those translations float around the internet just because they're so instantly accessible to a Russian person. There is no really way to translate or communicate that, but a Russian person just looking at dialogue from those games will instantly get interested. That's how well they're done. Those guys were truly the professionals, and those translations will stay forever.
Cool. Christian.
Well, there were a few in Space Quest 5. For example, the fellow student who's telling Roger the test results and who didn't do very well in those is called Cadet Kohl in the German version, like the Chancellor from Germany back in the days. I don't recall what the guy is called in the English version though.
Well, hey guys, thanks for being a part of this. Any last parting words for the world?
Can you leave me alone now? I got this morning DOS talk to get back to.
Sure, fine. Me and Chris can have a lot of fun while you're away. Chris!
Yeah, you guys go have fun on your own. I'm gonna go play something different.
Off to play Princess Maker, are you?
So what if I am?
So, Chris, guess it's just you and me then.
Yeah, actually, not that I don't mind you barging in on my day, but some of us have actual work to do. It's not that we can sit around and play Space Quest all day.
Hey, I do other things. Sometimes I annoy my friends about it.
Yeah, why don't you go do that then? I gotta go.
Okay, I think I just might do that. Hey, Space Venture Intern, how you doing back there?